Ask Dan Schneider. This question is from Pal Joey. Pal Joey writes to me and asks, Dan, you said on many an occasion that you think that 2001 A Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick is the greatest science fiction film by far that you've ever seen. What films in other categories would you say would rank as the greatest in their field? Well, I do think that 2001 A Space Odyssey is probably the greatest sci-fi film. And I shouldn't even say probably, it is. Really, it's just a battle for number two. I think Solaris, the original by Tarkovsky, is a good number two. Both of these films go beyond the genre tropes that came before them, that they were either just silly space operas or that they were just, monster of the week kind of movies. There had been some good sci-fi films before then in the 50s, The Day the Earth Stood Still, Forbidden Planet, but 2001 set the bar so high, and Solaris is one of the few films that's even tried to challenge it. When I look at films like the recent Interstellar and whatnot, they don't even try to be deeper. Prometheus was supposed to be a film that was deeper or whatnot, and then you have a film like Alien, which came and had some good stuff. But usually you get people putting crap like Blade Runner, and Blade Runner is probably one of the most overrated movies of all time. It's a good, solid film, but it has such bad writing and so much of it. It's so predictable. It's a typical Philip K. Dick kind of film. If I think of, say, comedy, it depends on what kind of comedy. People often think that there's just one type of comedy. If you're talking overall about, for example, the deepest or most artistic comedy ever made, it's also probably a Kubrick film. And that would be Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. That's a black comedy. It's a satire. It hits all the right notes. It's outrageous and whatnot. But then if I think of a serious comedy in the terms of on a human level that isn't just satire, but is comedy that has some dramatic moments in it, I would have to go with Woody Allen's films. And probably the best of them, the best of his pure comedies, is Radio Days. It's his version of Fellini's Amarcord, but it's much better. He takes it to a much higher level. And then there's the idea of a comedy just as a flat out laughter. And there's a lot of films from, great comedy teams like Abbott and Costello, the Marx Brothers, the Three Stooges, and so forth. Laurel and Hardy, even if you want to go back to the silence, Charlie Chaplin and those comedians, Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd. But I would have to argue probably the film that I think is just the jokes per minute funniest is the all-star comedy extravaganza from the early 1960s. It's a mad, 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 mad world. It is the ultimate sort of celebrity cameo film as well. But it's just laugh out loud funny when Jonathan Winters tears apart that garage with the two dopes in it, and so many other scenes too. Then if I think of something like dramas, there's a number of ways you can go with that. Certainly, some of the Kurosawa dramas could make arguments for High and Low, Ikiru, The Bad Sleep Well. There's also Tokyo Story by Ozu. Ozu is probably my favorite overall film director, and Tokyo Story or Late Spring are maybe his two greatest evocations of life, the small, the simple life, and how to live it. And it's drama without melodrama. There are some great melodramas. Rocco and His Brother, too, would be one of the best melodramas out there. But, if you want to consider melodrama a genre, then there's like cartoon films. There are a lot of classic little short cartoons from the classic era of the Warner Brothers cartoons, Bugs Bunny and all that, the Fleischer cartoons. You had Roger Rabbit in the 1980s. But I think probably the best overall cartoon and the greatest cartoon film made, even though the animation is deliberately bad, is South Park. I think it's called Bigger, Longer, Uncut, which is the film that proves that you can use the word fuck creatively, and it does so over and over again, and crude sexual jokes and whatnot, and it does so brilliantly. As for genres like horror, I guess you could go to the original Night of the Living Dead is a good example. And then I guess if I'm going to talk overall, if I were to pick the overall greatest film, and I really hate top 10, top 20, top 100 lists, but I have to think of a film that does everything great. And the only film that I can think that does, or the film that does the most things great, is Fellini's 1959 masterpiece La Dolce Vita. It's a great drama. It's a great comedy. There's also a great musical number. There are great sub-stories. Each of the scenes are sketched out. It isn't plot-driven in the heavy-handed sense, but all of the scenes make sense and come together and form a great narrative. There are numerous quotations that are great. The word paparazzi came from that film, so it's culturally influential. And it endures like really almost no other of the Fellini films did. A lot of his films that came later, like Eight and a Half, were simply bettered by Stardust Memories by Woody Allen in 1980. And his later humor became flatulent and really some bad films. His early stuff was hit and miss. He had some great films like E. Vitelloni and Nights of Cabiria, but everything came together in that film. Marcello Mastroianni gives one of the great performances. It's a great screenplay, great cinematography, great use of music. Everything hits on that. And there are other films where you can say that, but they don't do as much. As I said, a great drama, a great comedy, a great musical. There are great dramas that do a lot, but I would have to go with La Dolce Vita. So those would be the films that I would put in my sort of canon of best of. So hopefully that answers your question.